it's because I grew up in Bradford, maybe because I still have family who live in Bradford. You know, my late stepfather, I remember him telling a story about he was a taxi driver talking to a Pakistani taxi driver who said, "This is our town now." Or my sister, one of my sisters who still works in the co-op, being called a white bitch by an irate customer. So I don't have that reflexive middle class view that racism's only ever a one-way street.
Colin Brazier, thank you so much for coming out of your MSM retirement. You know that I have been pushing for so long, but I have to tell you, Colin, I get so many messages, and I am not misleading you for 1 second saying, Dan, you have to get Colin Brazier on the show because he's still posting all of these incredible things on X. So I finally convinced you.
Right back at you. If I can indulge in a little light sycophancy, I want to say thank you for inviting me on. I want to say thank you for launching this extraordinary journalistic enterprise. I remember sitting by the banks of the River Thames months and months and months ago. We were talking about launching this, and I thought, well, Godspeed to you, Dan. You really deserve success, and this format deserves to work. But heck, there are a lot of headwinds, and you've pushed through them. Well done, you.
Thank you so much. No, I do remember that lunch, and I wasn't in the best place, shall we say, after what had been a pretty horrendous few months. But I'm such a big believer, as I know you are, that our mainstream media ecosystem is completely smashed. And I think what's interesting about my perspective, but especially your perspective, because of course you did, how many years did you do at, and I apologize.
25, Dan.
Yeah.
25.
25 years,
and you know,
quarter of a century.
We talk about this a lot. I mean, you know, it's this odd journalistic settlement in this country that for centuries, you arrived at the truth by being adversarial. You know, whether that was in the courts, whether that was in Parliament, whether that was in newspapers. You worked in newspapers, I worked in newspapers. You could buy the Guardian or the Telegraph and you guessed that the truth was somewhere in the middle. You sat in the parliamentary chamber, the opposition said this, the government said that, the truth was somewhere in the middle. Lord Reith came along at the BBC 100 years ago and said, no, we're going to do away with all that. We are going to decide what the truth is. A group of people right now sitting in a corporate office in West London, whether that's at Sky, whether that's the BBC, will decide what the truth is. It's a nonsense. You arrive at the truth by being adversarial. You are taking up a position. It's on offer. I'm not compelled to subsidize it, as I am the BBC, which sticks in many people's craws. There has to be an alternative viewpoint. And, you know, yes, GB News was part of that story as well. We can talk about that later, perhaps. But, you know, it is simply vital that we have a variety, a diversity of cognitive opinion. And that's what we've been denied really until the last 5, 6, 7 years.
No, indeed. And I think it's so critical that the state is not censoring and controlling those outlets. But look, I do want to come to the MSM and the state of the MSM later in the show. But given, I think, Colin, what you would describe as the passion of your life, the issues with the UK birth rate, I wanted to bring to your attention, I know you're all across it, this shocking post from Matt Goodwin, who had done all of this research for the University of Buckingham, and he revealed last week white Britons will become a minority by 2063. The foreign-born and their descendants will be a majority by 2079, and roughly 1 in 5 will follow Islam by the year 2100. Now, what's actually fascinating, Colin, since that research went mainstream, and I give Matt Goodwin a lot of credit for doing it, by the way, is actually, and I don't know where you stand on this, but the vast majority of people who I've spoken to believe those figures are actually incredibly conservative. And that given the birth rate and the discrepancies in the birth rate between the native population and the Muslim population, actually, it's not going to take this long. So look, you're the expert on this. Like, how bad is this crisis for the United Kingdom, and is there any way to solve it?
Matt Goodwin said in his piece that consistently the demographers and the statisticians have underweighed the rate of migration to the UK. So the weight of evidence suggests that, if anything, we are undercounting. The figures
Yeah.
speak for themselves. Matt Goodwin isn't the first person to come up with this, but credit to him, you're right, and credit too to the University of Buckingham, because these academics need time to crunch these numbers. And we have an academy out there, we have a higher education sector, university sector, which does not commission this kind of work because it presents, as we've seen with what Matt Goodwin's come up with, inconvenient truths. The bigger question, and you're right to get to it, is what on earth do we do about it? I got a text a couple of weeks ago from one of Nigel Farage's advisors who said, what did you make of what Nigel's had to say about pronatalism, by which I mean the policies which allow you to encourage people to have all the children they want, not some sort of weird Handmaid's Tale, old white men telling young women to have children, but actually simply saying to young men and women, how can we help you have all the children you want? And what I said to Nigel's advisor was that we've got to get both sides of the equation right. It's not good enough. It's right, but it's not good enough to simply say we must curb immigration lest we lose what it is to be this country. You have to fulfill the other side of the equation. The other side of the equation, short term, is to make sure that all the people who can do the jobs that currently migration has been called upon to fill need to be, to some degree more than we currently do, compelled to work.
Yes, because Colin, sorry to interrupt, but I think it's worth pointing out, because of the political angle on this, you are actually opposed, I believe, because I read your column on this, you are opposed to Reform UK lifting the two-child benefit cap.
I am. I think because when you've got the much bigger problem right now in the UK is people simply not having any children at all, involuntary childlessness. I look at my 6 children who are coming into that, my eldest is just turned 26, they're coming into that world now where, they're saddled with student debt, they're looking at the prohibitive cost of both childcare when that's necessary, but the housing is the key thing. And of course, so much of our housing stock, the really good, in my home city of Bradford, when I think of those big Victorian terraced houses, which are simply not accessible anymore. They have gone to New Britons, if I can put it that way. There's been a flight to the countryside where new builds happening, yes, but the houses are pretty pokey and they're expensive. So how do we make that equation balance? We have to not indulge in fantasy politics like lifting the two-child cap. That's not helping people who can't have any children at all. It's not helping those who've had one and think, crikey, that was tough, that was expensive, we can't have another. I wrote a book down 15 years ago lamenting the growth of the one-child family. I remember people at the time said, you can't, you've got friends, I've got friends who, for a variety of different reasons, only have one child. But it is true that many people would love a second child. They simply feel they can't afford it. And I think there are brilliant reasons why society needs families, multi-child families, where an only child has a sibling. So let's not worry too much about those families that have 5, 6, 7 kids living sometimes in quite luxurious accommodation funded by you and me taxpayers. Let's worry far more about those people, young Britons who are desperate to have a family. I'm not talking about those people who don't want kids. If that's their choice, have your 3 skiing holidays a year, your nice cream carpets, that's fine. I'm talking about those people like my children who would, I think, want children, but the headwinds against them are so strong, so strong, that it's going to be tough. We've got to make it simpler for them.
But first, something really important to talk to you about: scammers and spammers who are out there to ruin your life. Now, we've all experienced more and more of those spam emails, text messages, and robo phone calls. Not only are they annoying and time-consuming to deal with, but they usually represent a gross invasion of your private information that can cause vast financial and reputational damage. I mean, how the heck did they get your information in the first place? Well, it's likely as a result of data brokers who know everything about you, your health information, relationship status, mortgage details, and so much more, and sell it for a profit. These data brokers can directly or indirectly expose sensitive information to bad actors, putting you at risk of identity theft. Now, the number of data breaches worldwide rises every year. According to the annual data breach report by the Identity Theft Resource Center, it went up 72% in 2023 compared to the previous year. This means you and your loved ones are also at constantly increasing risk of data breaches as a growing list of data brokers hold your personal information. Your personal information, can you believe this, being sold or published online without you even knowing about it. Now, the consequences of that can be shocking. Health insurance companies could actually raise your rates based on your online activity. Huge loans have been taken under people's names without them even knowing about it. And scammers have even started to use AI to mimic the voices of friends and family to trick victims into sending them money. These imposter scams rely entirely on the voice data they can find online. While you can ask these data brokers to delete your personal information, the process takes hundreds of hours to do manually and requires repetition. The good news is that today I have a solution for you that I use and personally endorse. Go to incogni.com/outspoken and get 60% off an annual plan. Incogni reaches out to data brokers on your behalf, requests your personal data removal, and handles any objections from their side. And the whole process is automated, ensuring that your data stays off the market by conducting repeated removals and taking down your data if it pops up again. This is what makes the yearly subscription especially advantageous. So I do the annual plan. It's just so brilliant. I get emails. They're constantly taking me off these lists, and it is a simple process. You just create an account, grant Incogni the right to work for you, and they will contact the data brokers on your behalf to request your personal data removal. So go to incogni.com/outspoken and get 60% off an annual plan right now. It could be the most important decision you make. But now, back to the show. Yeah, and I think what's really interesting, of course, and what the mainstream media avoids talking about, and to be frank, what Reform UK also avoid talking about, is that religion really does come into this. Like, there is no issue in terms of the Muslim population in this country and their birth rate, is there? I mean,
It varies according to religiosity, and that's true of all religions. So Salafists and Deobandis will obey the injunction to have more children. Orthodox Jews will have more children than Reform Jews. The Mormon, the biggest birth rate in the world pretty much is in Utah because of the Mormons.
Yes.
So yes, what matters is religiosity. I'm a practicing Roman Catholic, but there are lots of Catholics who have family sizes indistinguishable from those of the broader secular
yes,
population.
Although you have practiced what you preach, Colin. Reminder, how many kids?
Well, 6 when I last looked. What's Boris Johnson up to now?
Oh, he's well overtaken you. He has well overtaken you. But does it matter? Does demography matter when we're having this conversation? Because I think this is where there is the biggest split on the right in the United Kingdom now, because you have Nigel Farage, very, very conscious of his coverage in the mainstream media, very conscious of the fact that he believes that the only way he can get to number 10 Downing Street is with a significant Muslim vote, saying it just doesn't matter. Demography doesn't matter. They don't even really want to talk about this Matt Goodwin report. Whereas actually the so-called online right, as we're now described, I guess, say, well, no, it really does matter. It does matter to the United Kingdom as a Christian country, the demography of our country. And obviously, there are a lot of non-white Christians as well. I'm not disputing that for a single second. But do you think demography and the changing demography of this country is part of the conversation in regards to birth rates?
No, and in a sense, part of that is absolutely explicable, which is that demographic problems are 20 years away. And, as with long-term infrastructure, as you could even argue for things like climate change, if you can't see it today, it's difficult to think too much about tomorrow. But the truth is, some very grown-up conservative politicians around the world are thinking really seriously about this. If you look at what Meloni is doing in Italy, having very candid conversations about birth rates. If you look at what the Hungarians have done under Viktor Orban, and I know that to some degree the jury's out on whether it is true that you can simply sort of bribe people, women not paying any income tax as soon as they have 2 children, how much that really works and whether culture matters more than economics, we can argue about that. But I think we've gone way beyond the point now where anybody can maintain that the state does not have a dog in this fight. It does. That's not to say, of course, that an individual that it's any business of the state to wag the finger at an individual and say, you must have children. Whether you decide to have a family or not is entirely a personal matter. But whether the state can remain neutral on the question anymore given what you're saying and given some of the graphs you flashed up on screen, Dan, showing what happens in 30, 40 years from now, the state can no longer remain neutral about that. And I look at the work of a friend of mine, Paul Morland, who's written 3 books now looking at this. Each of his books grow ever more alarmist, I mean that kindly, about some of the projections we're looking at. People are putting their head into the sand. He's one of the people, Viktor Orban, who hasn't done. And I know it's easy to denigrate him. And if I can just make a very brief segue, Dan.
Please.
You flashed up a picture of me from 10 years ago. I looked a lot better. And I was on the border between Serbia and Hungary.
Yes.
My eyes were streaming because we'd been tear gassed, actually by Hungarian riot police. I'd like to get into this later if we can, because the way that day unfolded tells us an awful lot about the way the mainstream media work. But in terms of him, in terms of Viktor Orban, I remember just trying to tell that story in 2015 and 10 years ago. It was a real red pill moment for me, Dan. It really was, because it seemed to me entirely inexplicable, entirely explicable what the Hungarians were trying to do. They were saying, no, you don't have permission to come into our country. You don't come into our country. And yet the way that story was reported by my colleagues was shattering to me. Maybe it's because I grew up in Bradford, maybe because I still have family who live in Bradford. My late stepfather, I remember him telling a story about, he was a taxi driver talking to a Pakistani taxi driver who said, this is our town now. Or my sister, one of my sisters who still works in the co-op, being called a white bitch by an irate customer. So I don't have that reflexive middle class view that racism's only ever a one-way street, that that changing demographic patterns or immigration doesn't have an impact on the working class in particular. It does. I've seen it. And, Orban has recognized that pronatalism and demography long-term are part of the solution.
Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are.